Hello? The million-dollar question. Who created God? Now this seems to be one of those big showstoppers among the religious and among the non-religious. So it's all about, well, if God created everything we see, who created God? Valid question, right? So I wanted to discuss what the Bible says and what scientific factual evidence says and what we know through science and investigations and thought, and apply that to God. So first of all, we'll start with the Bible, get that out of the way. The Bible says God has no beginning and no end. So the Bible says God has no creator. There is no one that created God. He always was, he always is. Okay? He always will be. He just exists. Okay? That's why God says when they say, tell him who you are, who do I tell him you are? He says, I am the existing one. I exist. Tell them I am. I exist. Okay? So God's never had a creator, according to the Bible. Now, when you look at what we see, we know physical matter, all physical matter must have a beginning and an end. Okay? It all has a beginning and an end. So to us, to comprehend something without a creator is kind of mind-baffling, and it's on a different level. It's kind of ludicrous to us. Okay? Which is why the Big Bang Theory, for instance, there's so much problem with that, because it says everything came from nothing. Everything came from nothing is an impossibility in the physical world. Now, a lot of atheists justify it irrationally with all these dumb, illogical ideas about how nothing can create everything, even though we can't ever witness such a thing. We can't do tests to create such a thing, and we can't witness it, but the atheist community just accepts that. It says, yeah, it makes sense to me. That's called religion. But that aside, I'm not here to talk about the atheists. I'm here to talk about why God doesn't need a creator in this physical realm that we understand, and how it's logical that he doesn't need a creator. Now let's start with light, for instance, or energy. Let's start with energy. Energy just exists. It doesn't start, it doesn't end, it doesn't die. It just is. It just exists. Okay? So, right, we're willing to accept this as an idea, right, and as a fact. But then when it comes to the God idea, well, it's like, well, you know, even if God is energy, it's a conscious being, and, you know, just doesn't make sense. But fair enough. You don't want to accept that. I can live with that, even though that right there in itself kind of shows if God is energy of sorts, a beginning and an end is not a requirement. It's not required. But that aside. So now if we look at time, matter creates time, okay? So everything has a beginning and an end because of time. We are all bound to time in this physical world, okay? But if you look at something like light, light is not bound by time, okay? Light can actually go so fast that we say it can travel through time, therefore not being bound by time. So light in itself, we are admitting, is not bound by our conception of time. Okay, so we know right there that time is a different scale for light than it is for us, if time even exists for light. Now, aside from that, if you look at something like the Big Bang, okay? The Big Bang, what they call now is an implosion, right? Because originally the priest that theorized it, looking through the telescope, noticed that everything's shrapnel, everything's moving further away. Okay, so we can pretty safely assume that there was an explosion which is pushing everything away, which is exactly what we see. Okay, but then you run into these problems, right? You run into things are spinning backwards, and there's things, everything's gaining momentum. It's gaining speed up there. When an explosion, if it just exploded, everything should be slowing down. But it's not slowing down, it's gaining speed. And things are spinning the wrong way. So we can safely assume that an explosion is not over. So what they do is they call it an implosion now. Okay, so they're admitting, the scientific community is admitting, the only possible explanation for this, because we know by looking at it, it's an explosion. I mean, there's shrapnel, and it mimics an explosion that we can test and witness, but yet this is all not in line with an explosion ending. So the only rational explanation is that we're inside of an explosion. Okay, we're still inside of this explosion, and eventually it's going to come back on itself. So it's an implosion. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting, because if we are inside of an explosion, that means that the explosion, the Big Bang, is on a different time scale than we are. So the Big Bang, the universe, its time frame is completely different than our time frame. Our time frame is completely different as theirs. Light's time frame is completely different than all of it. Okay, so time is subjective to your situation, to how you know it, right? And you could take this all the way down to, like, if you look at a fly, for instance, or an ant or a spider, these quick movements that are just so fast to us, but is it fast to them? Are they on another time frame as well? Another time scale? Okay, so you have all these provable different time scales and all these theoried different time scales. So all these time scales are proving that time is subjective. Now, if God is energy and light, and his light is not bound to time, nor does energy cease to exist, begin, or end, then why is the question of who created God such a serious thing? Nobody created God. Why does God need to have a creator? Why does something, just because we can't fathom it, why does he need to have a creator? He's not bound by time. The only reason we need a creator, right, is because of time. Time binds us to creation. Something had to begin and something has to end, because that is bound by time. Beginning time, ending time, in between time, it's all relevant to time. God is not relevant to time, and we can witness his creation is not relevant to the time as we know it. So if time is not, a time as we know it is not actually the law of the universe, then why is it such a big mystery why we can witness time scales different than what we witness time scales or experience time scales, but yet to think God is on a completely different time scale is ludicrous, and to think that he's not subjected to time, period, like energy and light, is even more ludicrous for people to comprehend. God doesn't need a creator, and science has proven that God does not need a creator. There's no reason to keep asking this, who created God? Well, who created them? Well, who created them? No one created God. It just exists. Now, just because we can't fathom how something intelligent could just exist, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter if we can fathom it or grasp it. It's not really relevant to us, because we're so minute in this big picture. We don't need to grasp it and understand it. But what we do grasp and understand about time shows us that time is not quite what we experience. So why is it so irrational to think that God is on a completely different level with time, more in depth? He created time, and of course, he is not bound to his creation. That being said, everything intelligent needs a creation. That's why it's a big mystery who created God, right? How can something intelligent not be created? So why is it a big mystery where we came from? We're unlike any other species. We've never witnessed another species turn into us. We've never witnessed another species evolve to an intellectual level as us. And we never will. And that's pretty obvious. It's been going on for, according to science, which isn't science. This is not science at all. Billion-year-old planets is not science whatsoever. It's not provable. It's relied solely on techniques that are flawed, like radiometric dating, completely flawed, provably flawed, ocean salt contents, assumptions. The theory is completely flawed. Okay, you can't call an assumption a fact and then teach it in school and call me a bigot. So that's the point, is God doesn't need a creator. Science has proven that God doesn't need a creator. The question is not relevant at all. And it's a stupid one, if you ask me. If you just read the Bible, you could have came to these conclusions on your own, because the Bible tells us that God has no beginning and no end. He has no creator. And you think it's hard for us to fathom. Think about how hard it was for them way back then to fathom. But yet they still wrote it down because God told them the truth. And now we know that that part of the Bible is absolutely scientifically possible because we can witness it. So God doesn't have a beginning. He doesn't have an end. He wasn't created. We are His creation. Intellectually, we are bound by time and space, which is why we have beginnings and ends. God is not bound by times and space. Therefore, He has no beginning, no end.